My name is Margaret Hale. I am 71 years old as I record this, and for most of my life, I believed that love, real love, meant sacrifice without limits. I believed a mother's job was to give and give and give again, even when it hurt, especially when it hurt. I believed that if I kept showing up with open hands, open doors, and an open heart, my son would one day look back and say, "She was always there for me. I owe her everything." I was wrong. I wasn't raising a son who would grow into gratitude. I was training someone who would learn how to take. And it took me decades to understand the difference. My only child, Daniel, was born late in my life. I was 39 when I held him for the first time, exhausted and terrified and completely undone by love. His father, my husband Thomas, used to joke that Daniel arrived just in time to keep us young. Thomas died when Daniel was 17. Heart attack. No warning, no goodbye. One minute we were arguing over whether Daniel needed a newer car for college, and the next I was standing in a hospital hallway holding a paper cup of cold coffee, realizing my entire future had collapsed into a single sentence from a doctor I would never see again. From that day forward, it was just Daniel and me, and I promised myself something in that moment, something I would later regret. I promised that Daniel would never struggle the way I had struggled after Thomas died. I promised that no door would close on him because of money. I promised I would make it easier. That promise became the foundation of everything that followed. I paid for his college, every tuition bill, every textbook, every apartment deposit. When his car broke down, I replaced it. When he wanted to study abroad for a semester, I said yes before he even finished asking. When he graduated and couldn't find his footing, I covered his rent. Just for a few months, he said. Those few months turned into years. I told myself this was temporary, that once he found his career, once life stabilized, once he met the right woman, everything would balance out. And then Daniel met Claire. I remember the first time he brought her to my house. She smiled politely, shook my hand, and complimented my living room without ever really looking at me. She spoke quickly, confidently. Everything about her suggested she was used to being accommodated. Daniel watched her constantly, laughing when she laughed, adjusting himself around her moods. I told myself that was love. But even then, something inside me tightened. Not jealousy, recognition. I had seen this dynamic before, in friends' marriages, in families where one voice slowly disappeared. Still, when Daniel told me he wanted to marry her, I didn't hesitate. I helped pay for the engagement ring. I helped pay for the wedding planner deposit. I helped pay for the venue reservation. I helped pay for things I wasn't even invited to discuss. Every time my phone rang, it was another expense. "Mom, can you help us with—" "Yes," I would say, already reaching for my checkbook. Because that's what good mothers do. At least, that's why I believed. Then one afternoon, about 6 months before the wedding date, Daniel stopped calling. Not completely, but enough. Messages took longer to answer, calls became shorter, plans were always postponed. When I asked about wedding details, he brushed me off. "Claire's handling most of it. You don't need to stress." That word, stress, was interesting, as if my involvement was a burden rather than a contribution. Then one evening, my neighbor Linda knocked on my door holding her phone. "Margaret," she said carefully, "I think you should see this." It was a photo. Daniel, Claire, standing outside a small courthouse, married. I didn't understand what I was looking at first. My brain refused to process it. The next morning, I woke up early, the way I always had when Daniel was a child. Habit doesn't disappear just because the person you built it around grows up and walks away. I made tea. I sat at the kitchen table, and I waited for my hands to stop shaking. They didn't. I kept replaying the photos in my mind. Daniel smiling, Claire leaning into him, her parents standing close enough to touch them. Everyone looked relaxed, comfortable, included. Everyone except me. Around 10 in the morning, my phone finally rang. Daniel's name appeared on the screen. I didn't answer right away. For the first time in his life, I let it ring. When I did pick up, I didn't say hello. There was a pause on the other end. "Mom," he said, cautious, "did you see it?" So he knew. "Yes," I replied. My voice sounded older than it ever had. "I saw it." Another pause. I could almost hear him choosing his words, arranging them carefully, like someone stepping through a room filled with glass. "We didn't mean to hurt you," he said quickly. "It just happened. Happened. As if marriages fall from the sky like rain." "Aside from her entire family being there," I said, "who exactly wasn't it meant to hurt?" "That's not fair," he replied. His tone sharpened slightly, defensive. "We wanted something simple, no pressure, no expectations." No expectations. I laughed then, not because it was funny, but because something snapped into clarity. "Daniel," I said slowly, "I paid for your engagement ring. I paid for your wedding deposits. I paid for the apartment you're living in right now. And you're telling me I had no expectations?" He sighed. "Mom, money doesn't mean ownership." That sentence landed harder than he could have imagined. "You're right," I said. "It doesn't. But it does mean respect." Claire's voice appeared in the background, faint but unmistakable. "Tell her we'll visit soon," she said. Tell her, not speak to me herself, not apologize, not explain, just manage me. Daniel cleared his throat. "We'll come by next weekend, talk everything through." I didn't argue, I didn't cry, I didn't beg. I simply said, "All right." When I hung up, I sat there for a long time, staring at the space where Thomas's chair used to be. And for the first time since my husband died, I felt completely alone. The following week passed slowly. Every sound in the house felt louder. Every memory felt heavier. I thought about all the times Daniel had called me for help, rent shortfalls, credit card bills, temporary emergencies. I thought about how I never once asked him to show me his finances. I trusted him. When they arrived the next Saturday, they didn't knock. They let themselves in. Claire walked ahead of Daniel, scanning my living room as if she were inspecting something she planned to renovate. She hugged me briefly, quick, polite, distant. Daniel sat across from me, arms crossed. "We didn't think you'd take it this hard," he began. That was when I realized something else. They had come prepared, not to apologize, but to defend themselves. "You didn't think I'd take being erased hard?" I asked. Claire spoke then, her voice smooth and practiced. "Margaret, this wasn't about you. It was about us starting our life without interference." Interference. I nodded slowly. "And my involvement was that interference when I paid your bills?" Daniel shifted uncomfortably. "We appreciate everything you've done," he said, "but we're adults now." Adults. I leaned forward. Then start acting like it. There it was, the first boundary I had ever spoken out loud. Claire's expression changed slightly, not anger, calculation. "Well," she said, "speaking of acting like adults, we were hoping you could still help us for a little while longer, just until Daniel's promotion goes through." Of course. There it was, the real reason for the visit. "How much?" I asked. Daniel looked relieved. "Just the rent, a couple months." I didn't change the will that night. I wanted to. My pen hovered over the paper, my hand steady, but my heart still catching on old habits. Mothers are trained by culture, by instinct, by fear to hesitate before doing anything that might make them seem cruel. So I closed the drawer, but something had already shifted. The next morning, my phone buzzed before I'd even finished my coffee. It was Daniel. "Mom," he said without greeting, "Claire didn't sleep all night." I waited. "She's really hurt," he continued. "She feels like you're rejecting her." Interesting how quickly the story had turned. "I didn't reject her," I said. "I stopped funding you." "That's the same thing to her," he snapped. There it was, the confirmation I needed. Over the next week, the calls came daily, sometimes from Daniel, sometimes from numbers I didn't recognize. Daniel's aunt called to say I was being too emotional. A family friend reminded me that a mother's love should be unconditional. Someone even suggested I was jealous of Claire. Jealous at 71. No one asked how it felt to be excluded. No one asked why my name never appeared in a single wedding photo. No one asked why respect had been replaced with expectation. They only asked why the money stopped. That was when I realized the truth. My value had been calculated, measured, converted into monthly payments. One afternoon, Daniel showed up unannounced. This time, he didn't sit. "We're behind on rent," he said. "The landlord is threatening late fees." I folded my hands. "That sounds stressful." "So you'll help?" he asked quickly. "No." His face hardened. "You're choosing pride over your own child." I stood then, my knees stiff but my voice clear. "I'm choosing dignity," I said, "something you forgot to invite me to." He stared at me like he didn't recognize me. "You've changed," he said. "Yes, because I had to." After he left, I called my lawyer. We scheduled an appointment for the following week. Sitting in that office felt surreal. I'd always assumed my will was just paperwork, something that wouldn't matter until I was gone. But as my lawyer read through it, explaining options calmly and professionally, I felt something lift. "You're allowed to protect yourself," he said gently, "at any age." I removed Daniel as beneficiary, not out of spite, out of truth. I redirected everything, to charities, to scholarships, to people who would never confuse love with entitlement. When I signed my name, my hand didn't shake. Word traveled fast. Daniel exploded. He left voicemails I didn't answer. He accused me of manipulation, of revenge, of ruining his future. Claire sent one message: "You'll regret this when you're alone." I looked around my quiet home, and for the first time, the silence didn't feel empty. It felt honest. The silence didn't last. It never does when money disappears. Within a month, Daniel and Claire's lives began to unravel in small, messy ways, the kind you don't post online, the kind you only admit when desperation outweighs pride. It started with late-night calls, voicemails left after midnight, Daniel's voice unsteady, the confidence gone. "Mom, we just need a little help, just this once." I didn't respond. Then came the texts, long ones, carefully written, rewritten, sent again with slight changes, each version designed to land differently. "You raised me better than this. Family doesn't abandon family. What would Dad think?" That last one hurt. They always know where to aim. I sat with that message for a long time, imagining Thomas's face, his steady presence, the way he used to tell Daniel that independence wasn't cruelty, it was responsibility. And I knew, without doubt, what Thomas would think. He would be proud of me. Claire escalated next. She posted vague messages online about toxic parents and financial abuse disguised as love. Friends I hadn't spoken to in years began messaging me, some politely, others accusing me outright. "You should be ashamed. They're newlyweds. Do you want to lose your son forever?" I lost him the moment he chose silence over honesty. I began to understand something deeper then. Loneliness and peace are not the same thing. I was alone, but I wasn't empty. One afternoon, I received a letter in the mail. Not an email, not a text, a letter. Inside, Daniel had written about their rent, their car repairs, Claire quitting her job because of stress. He wrote about how hard it was to start a marriage without support. Not once did he write the word sorry. At the bottom, in smaller handwriting, he added, "We really need help." I folded the letter carefully and placed it in a box with other things I was done carrying. That evening, I made a decision. I started living. I joined a local walking group. I volunteered twice a week at a literacy center. I traveled, small trips at first, then longer ones. For the first time in decades, my calendar belonged to me. Daniel noticed. "Must be nice," he said bitterly during one of our rare conversations, "traveling while we are barely surviving." "It is nice," I said. "You should try budgeting." He hung up. Months passed. The calls slowed. The messages stopped. I heard through relatives that they downsized, that Claire was angry, that Daniel blamed me for everything that went wrong. And maybe he needed to, because facing the truth that he had built his life on someone else's sacrifice was harder. One morning, as I sat on my porch watching the sun rise, I realized something that made my chest tighten. I wasn't waiting anymore. Not for an apology, not for reconciliation, not for permission to be at peace. I had chosen myself, and that choice had cost me a son, but saved my soul. Years passed, not all at once, not dramatically, just quietly, the way real time does when no one is watching for milestones. Daniel and I existed in the same world, but not in each other's lives. Holidays came and went. Birthdays passed without cards. I stopped checking my phone for his name. And in that space where grief had once lived, something else took root. Stability, routine, peace. Then, one winter morning, my body reminded me that time is not sentimental. I collapsed in my kitchen while reaching for a mug. The diagnosis wasn't fatal, but it was serious enough to shake everyone who heard about it. Surgery, recovery, weeks of forced stillness. Word reached Daniel within days. He came to see me in the hospital. Older, thinner, tired in a way that sleep doesn't fix. He stood at the foot of my bed, hands in his pockets, unsure. "I heard," he said. "I'm still here," I replied. He nodded. "I thought maybe this changes things." I waited. "I mean," he continued carefully, "life's short. Maybe we can move past everything." "Everything?" I repeated. "Including the will?" His eyes flicked away. There it was. "I'm not here for money," he said too quickly. I smiled faintly. "That's never been true." He sighed, sat down. "We're struggling," he admitted. "Rent's gone up. Claire's parents can't help anymore. And if something happened to you—" I raised my hand. "Stop," I said gently. This conversation ends here. He looked at me, frustration breaking through. So that's it? You'd rather give your money to strangers than your own son? They aren't strangers. They're people who don't confuse love with leverage. His voice rose. You're punishing me forever for one mistake. No, I said. I'm protecting myself from a pattern. Silence stretched between us. Finally, he asked quietly, Do you ever miss me? I closed my eyes. I miss who I thought you were, and I grieved that a long time ago. He stood, hesitated. I hope you don't die alone, he said. I met his gaze. I won't. After he left, I recovered slowly, carefully, on my own terms. I updated my documents again, medical directives, power of attorney, everything clear and unambiguous. No confusion, no leverage, no room for guilt. Today, as I record this, my life is smaller, but fuller. I wake up without dread. I spend my money without fear. I give my love where it is received, not extracted. If there is one thing I have learned, it is this. Being a parent does not mean erasing yourself. Love does not require financial self-destruction, and boundaries are not cruelty, they are clarity. I did not revoke my inheritance out of anger. I reclaimed my dignity out of survival, and I would do it again, every single time. Recovery changes the way you hear the world. After the surgery, every sound felt sharper. Footsteps in the hallway, the hum of the refrigerator, the ticking clock that once faded into the background now insisted on being noticed. When you've nearly lost time, time stops being invisible. Friends checked in, neighbors brought food, people I hadn't spoken to in years sent cards, simple messages, no expectations attached. Daniel did not. And strangely, that hurt less than I expected, because by then I had already done the grieving most parents never realize they need to do, grieving the child you imagined, not the one who exists. During my recovery, memories surfaced uninvited. Daniel at 6, standing in the doorway, asking if I'd stay until he fell asleep. Daniel at 14, furious because I wouldn't buy him the newest phone. Daniel at 22, promising that once he got on his feet, he'd take care of me. I remembered how proud I felt hearing that. I also remembered how many times temporary help became permanent. No one teaches mothers how to stop. They teach us how to give birth, how to feed, how to sacrifice. They don't teach us how to step back when love becomes extraction. 3 months after my surgery, Daniel reached out again. This time, the message was different. Short, neutral. Claire's pregnant. I stared at the words, waiting for something to rise inside me. Joy, fear, excitement. What came instead was caution. I replied with one sentence. I hope the baby is healthy. He called immediately. She's due in April, he said, voice softer now. I thought you might want to be involved. Involved how? I asked. There was hesitation. Well, he said, babies need a lot and family support matters. There it was again. Always framed as connection, always delivered as expectation. I won't be a wallet, but I can be respectful. That's not fair. Grandparents help. Grandparents help when they're invited into lives, I said calmly, not when they're remembered during shortages. Silence. You really won't change, he said. No, I replied. I finally did. He hung up. I sat there afterward, hands resting on my lap, heart steady. I realized something important then. Boundaries don't harden you, they clarify you. I wasn't angry. I wasn't bitter. I wasn't cold. I was awake. Weeks later, I rewrote letters, not to Daniel, but to myself. Letters forgiving the woman who thought love meant unlimited access. Letters forgiving the fear that told me setting limits would make me unlovable. Letters honoring the courage it took to stand alone. I didn't send them. Some truths are meant to stay with you. Spring came. Flowers bloomed in the garden Thomas and I planted decades ago. I spent mornings outside, knees aching, hands in soil, thinking about legacy. Not money, but example. What does a child learn when a parent never says no? What does a grandchild learn when dignity has a price tag? I made peace with the fact that I might never meet my grandchild, and that peace surprised me most of all, because it wasn't numbness, it was acceptance. I heard about the baby through other people. That's how it always happens when distance becomes permanent. You don't receive news, you overhear it. A cousin mentioned the due date in passing. A former neighbor asked if I was excited to be a grandmother. Someone else told me Claire had posted nursery photos online. Blue walls, soft lighting, smiling captions. A perfect beginning. I studied those images longer than I meant to, searching for something, some crack, some sign that love had finally humbled them. Instead, what I saw was performance. Daniel began to unravel after the baby arrived. Not immediately, not dramatically, slowly. The kind of unraveling that starts with resentment and ends with blame. He complained to relatives that I was withholding help, that I was cold, that I had chosen money over family. He never mentioned the secret wedding, never mentioned the years of support, never mentioned the conversations where I asked, quietly, to matter. Claire, I was told, had started referring to me as absent. Absent? As if absence were something that just happened? As if I hadn't been actively excluded first. One afternoon, Daniel called me out of nowhere. His voice sounded different, tired, fractured. "She cries all the time," he said suddenly. "The baby, I mean. Claire's overwhelmed. I'm working nonstop." I listened. "We don't sleep. We fight about money, about everything." I waited for the ask. "It would help," he said carefully, "if you could at least contribute something for the baby." There it was. They had changed the packaging. I closed my eyes. "Daniel," I said, "do you know why this hurts?" He didn't answer. "Because you're still trying to turn a relationship into a transaction." His voice rose. "It's your grandchild." "Yes, and I will not teach them that love arrives with invoices." Silence stretched. "You're heartless," he said. "No," I said, "I'm healed." He hung up. That night, I cried. Not because I doubted myself, but because motherhood ends in ways no one prepares you for. Not with death, not with distance, but with misrecognition. Being seen as the villain in the story you financed. Weeks later, Claire sent me a message. Long, emotional, carefully constructed. She wrote about postpartum exhaustion, about fear, about needing village support. She wrote that it was cruel to deny a child their grandmother. She ended with this: "If you don't step up now, you'll regret it forever." I read it 3 times. Then I deleted it. Regret is a powerful word, but it loses its power when it's been used as a weapon too many times. I sat in my living room that evening, the same room where Daniel once played on the floor, and I finally said the truth out loud. I was a good mother. Not perfect, not selfless to the point of erasure, but present, loving, generous. And I was allowed to stop. I wrote one final message to Daniel. "I wish your child health and safety. I wish you maturity and peace. I will not be involved financially. Please don't contact me again unless you want a relationship without conditions." He never replied. And strangely, that was the closure. Aging changes your priorities. Not because you stop wanting, but because you stop pretending. I no longer measured my days by what I could fix for someone else. I measured them by how honestly I lived inside them. Mornings became sacred. Slow coffee, soft light, a body that no longer rushed to prove usefulness. I downsized my house, not out of loss, but intention. I gave away furniture filled with memories that no longer needed walls to survive. I kept only what felt like mine, not what once belonged to a version of myself who believed love required endurance. People assume that when you cut off family, you live in regret. What they don't tell you is this: regret is louder when you keep betraying yourself. I began mentoring at the literacy center more seriously. One woman in her 40s, divorced, exhausted, rebuilding, once said to me, "I wish my mother had shown me how to say no." I smiled, because that was the legacy I was finally creating. Not bloodlines, examples. I updated my will again, not because I was afraid, but because I was precise. Scholarships for women returning to education, donations to domestic abuse shelters, a fund for elderly widows navigating life alone for the first time. Money, when used consciously, becomes closure. Sometimes I thought about my grandchild. I imagined small hands, a laugh, first words, and then I imagined what kind of grandmother I would have been if I had continued giving under pressure. Resentful, drained, silent. That child deserved better than a grandmother shaped by obligation. So did I. Years passed. My hair turned silver, my steps slowed, my voice deepened with certainty. I never heard from Daniel again, but I heard about him through the same distant channels. A job change, another move, more complaints, more blame, and always someone asking me if I'd reconsider. I never did. One evening, sitting alone with the window open and the sound of the city breathing around me, I spoke aloud to no one in particular. Love that demands silence isn't love. I slept peacefully that night. I always do now. Because my inheritance, what I truly left behind, was not money. It was the refusal to be used. It was the courage to end a cycle. It was the quiet, radical act of self-protection. And that was worth everything. There is a myth we are taught early and rarely question: that motherhood is infinite, that a good mother has no edge, that her love must stretch until it disappears. I believed that myth for most of my life. I believed that if I just gave enough patience, enough money, enough forgiveness, I would earn permanent belonging in my child's life. But love is not a currency, and sacrifice is not a guarantee. As I grew older, I began to see how deeply this myth damages women like me, women who confuse endurance with virtue, women who are praised for being strong while quietly being consumed. Strength, I learned, is not how much pain you can absorb. It is how clearly you can say, "This stops here." In my final years, people often asked me if I felt proud of my decision. That wasn't the right word. Pride suggests ego. What I felt was alignment. My life finally made sense to me. I had stopped negotiating my worth, stopped translating disrespect into misunderstanding, stopped rewriting history to make others comfortable. I began to speak plainly. When someone asked why my son wasn't in my life, I said, we wanted different things from each other. And I left it there. No explanations, no justifications, no shame. One autumn, I made one last change. I wrote a letter, not to Daniel, to the version of myself who once sat at a kitchen table staring at wedding photos she wasn't meant to see. I told her she wasn't foolish, only hopeful. I told her that love given freely is never wrong, but love demanded is never safe. I told her that walking away does not mean she failed. It means she survived. I sealed that letter and placed it with my documents, not as evidence, as truth. As my body slowed, my world became quieter, but not smaller. I watched seasons change without urgency. I let people come and go without fear. I trusted that what remained was meant to. On my last birthday, a woman from the literacy center hugged me and said, "You changed my life." I smiled, knowing something few people ever realize. Legacy is not who cries at your funeral. It's who lives differently because you existed. If Daniel ever tells this story, he may say I was cold, that I chose money over family, that I punished him. That's his version. This is mine. I was a mother who loved deeply, a woman who gave generously, and finally, a human being who chose herself. I did not revoke my inheritance in anger. I revoked access to my life when love became conditional. And in doing so, I left behind something far more valuable than money. I left behind the truth that no one, not even your child, has the right to consume you, and that choosing peace is not abandonment. It is wisdom.